From Kobe inspiring that comeback against the Dallas Mavericks to the insane 35-point bottle job from the Chicago Bulls against the Kings in 2009, here are some of the most impressive comebacks in NBA history. And I can't help but start with a game from last season, when the Los Angeles Clippers took on the Denver Nuggets at the Crypto.com Arena. Now, the impressive thing about this comeback isn't the margin of points. I mean, that is definitely impressive considering they came back from 25 points down, but rather the fact that neither of the two teams scored more than 90 points in the entire game makes it even more absurd. It's the only time a team overturned a 25-point deficit without scoring 90 points or more, and that tells you all you need to know about it. Both teams were struggling big time with their offense to start the game, with the Clippers having scored a miserly 28 points in the first half. The Nuggets took advantage, and at one point, they were up by 25 points. But thanks to a spirited performance by Eric Bledsoe, who was plus 28 in the 26 minutes off the bench, the Clippers completed a magnificent comeback in a very low-scoring game that ended 87-85 to the home side. It was made worse by the fact that the Los Angeles outfit were actually missing two of their biggest stars, Kawhi and Paul George, due to injury, and that's why Jokic explained that he just hopes people forget about the comeback. But talking about unforgettable comebacks, the Mavericks fans will never forget this fantastic 29-point comeback against the Minnesota Timberwolves. It was the stuff of dreams for the Dallas fans, but the Timberwolves deserve all the criticism for this one. However, I would like to point out that this Minnesota team just didn't know how to win games that season. They'd lost their superstar Kevin Garnett before the season began, and by December, they'd only managed 6 wins. The 7th was on its way as they led the Mavericks by 29 points early in the third quarter. But then, things changed dramatically. Jason Terry would inspire his team massively, scoring 24 of the remaining 29 points to cut the deficit. And the Jet took his Dallas side to a famous win and a comeback that is still remembered after all those years. But the Mavericks haven't always been at the right end of a comeback, as the Lakers turned the tables on them in this 30-point come-from-behind win in 2002. Yes, the Lakers were on course to do the three-peat, and they just couldn't lose, you know? But up until that point, they'd been horrific, while the Mavericks were enjoying a spectacular campaign. And with Shaq battling a toe injury, Dallas genuinely thought they had a chance of upsetting the reigning champions. And by the beginning of the third quarter, Adrian Griffin's layup had put the Mavs up by 30. That's when the Lakers decided that enough is enough. Despite Kobe's decent efforts in the third, though, Dallas still had a significant lead going into the fourth, only for the Black Mamba to explode. He made all of his shots in the fourth, and would also make the game-winning shot with just over 8 seconds left on the clock. It was a sensational display from Kobe, as his 21 points in the fourth outscored the entire Dallas side, and the Lakers, by the end of the game, had only led for 22 seconds. But it was enough for a famous win. Sorry Mavs fans, but this only gets worse from here, as their 30-point bottle job against the Toronto Raptors also makes the list. This time, even Luka Doncic couldn't help the Mavericks win after Dallas saw their lead grow by 30 in the third. After trailing at the end of the first quarter by 3 points, the Mavericks exploded over the course of the next two, outscoring the Raptors by 26 points. And at one point, their lead was up 30 points. But something went horribly wrong in the fourth. Kyle Lowry's impressive double-double with 32 points and 10 assists was combined with Chris Boucher's career-high 21 points, as the Raptors scored 47 points in the final quarter to hand the Mavericks a big 110-107 loss. But talking about big losses, let me take you to the TD Garden in Boston for the next huge comeback. The Boston Celtics would cut a 32-point deficit in this extraordinarily high-scoring game against the Spurs. The game is often remembered for Jason Tatum's magnificent 60-point performance. but people overlook just how good the San Antonio Spurs were to start the game. They were out of the blocks very quickly, scoring nearly 40 points in the first quarter, while keeping Boston to only 16. Then, they kept up the pressure as the Celtics doubled their tally in the second quarter, and still outscored them by 6 to take a 29-point lead into halftime, which had been up to 32 at one point, but Tatum had seen enough, and he knew that the Celtics needed to rally back immediately. And he exploded in the third, scoring the majority of his points right after halftime. Although, if not for Jaylen Brown's three-pointer towards the end of regular time, the Spurs might just have escaped with a win, but he forced overtime as Boston completed an impressive comeback, outscoring the Spurs 15-12 in overtime to win 143-140. Unbelievable bottle job, right? Wait until I tell you about the Chicago Bulls one. Up until the third quarter even, the Bulls had played the perfect game. Thanks to Luol Deng, the Chicago side had taken a 25-point lead into halftime and seen it grow up to a staggering 35 points too. But the wheels came completely off in the fourth quarter for them. Tyreke Evans helped the Sacramento Kings back into the game before the side completely dominated the fourth, outscoring the Bulls 33-10 in the final quarter to hand them a big loss. It was like the Bulls stopped playing, but they were hardly the only team to forget scoring buckets when up by 35, as the Washington Wizards did their perfect Bulls impression very recently this season. This really was the tale of two halves. The first one belonged to the Wizards, undoubtedly, as they stunned the Los Angeles Clippers in Washington. Every player was contributing for the Wizards as they led by 9 at the end of the first quarter and extended the margin to 31 points by the end of the first half. The total lead, as I've already mentioned, was as big as 35 points, but the Clippers simply didn't plan on giving up. They came roaring out in the third to score 40 points in the quarter, keeping the Wizards to 27, but they needed more of the same in the fourth, and that's exactly what they did. Another 40-point quarter, which included Luke Kennard scoring 7 points in the final 9 seconds, saw the Wizards take a narrow 116-115 win in Washington, and definitely one of the greatest comeback wins of all time too, but it pales in comparison to the most impressive comeback the NBA has ever seen. The time the Utah Jazz completed a 36-point comeback against the Denver Nuggets in 1996. That remains the biggest comeback in a game by any NBA franchise. And it's also a moment that every Nuggets player and fan regrets to this day. It will never be forgotten, of course, as Karl Malone and Jeff Hornacek did the impossible some 2.5 decades or so ago. Maybe it was due to the home fans that inspired this historic moment, but the Jazz were down by 70-34 in the final minute of the second quarter, and then they exploded in the second half, outscoring the Nuggets 71-33 to complete the most impressive NBA comeback of all time. Denver coach Dick Motta famously explained the loss by saying that the team looked like a deer in a headlight, and their elbows just froze. Not a great explanation, but definitely a memorable one. That's all I have on the most impressive comebacks in NBA history.